able to share what I've learned somewhat involuntarily over the last 5 years of being on the elder board at Bent Tree Bible Fellowship. So when I was asked to be an elder at our church, the thought that I had in my mind was, I hope I never have to deal with a situation involving sexual abuse. That's the one thing that I thought, I never want to have to deal with that as a leader in a church. And then I did. And I got an opportunity to walk through it with that couple that you've just had an opportunity to hear from the last hour, as well as dealing with other potentially predatory situations inside of our own walls at our church. And I thought, you know what, the Lord created an opportunity for me to grow through that as a church leader. And I thought, well, at least I'll never have to replace our senior pastor. I got to check that box as well. So here I am 5 years into being a church leader, and I'm here to tell you kind of what I think I've learned and to give you some tools that I think you'll find useful in responding as an organization or a church to allegations of sexual abuse. So I was wondering the other night, I said, why is it that the corporate world seems to have responded in a healthier way to the Me Too situation than the church has? And it occurred to me, corporations are more afraid of their shareholders than churches are. The church only has one shareholder, and it's a fear of the Lord problem. Do we as organizations, as churches, as elder boards, fear the Lord the way that we say we do? If we do, we need to establish what I'll call an ecclesiastical standard of care for responding to situations involving sexual abuse. Some of you have heard the term standard of care before. You have people who are in your body who are doctors, professionals, attorneys, accountants. I, as an attorney, am responsible for my conduct meeting a standard of care. And what that means is that I need to do at least what a reasonable lawyer in the same circumstances would have done in that situation. Unfortunately, I don't think we as a church, as an evangelical church, have developed an adequate standard of pastoral and leadership care in responding to situations involving abuse. We need one. We need one. ECFA recently published a book on church governance. We got a free copy. I think we got a couple of free copies sent to our church. It's entitled something like Lessons from the Church Boardroom. And their suggestion was that churches need to have a policy manual for their board of leaders to know how to respond when allegations arise. I want to propose another alternative. If your leadership lacks the requisite character and experience, no manual will help you. If you have the appropriate level of character and experience, no manual is necessary. And moreover, every situation I've encountered that involves sexual abuse is different. There's no way to address it with a manual or a set of procedures to which you can respond. So the very first incident we had at our church that required some measure of a response was we had an adult male servant who was, in my view, grooming a high school student for something that was going to happen in the future. That was my first exposure as an elder or a leader in a church to dealing with a situation like that. And so what did I do? I sought out the standard of care. What is it that churches should do to respond to these situations? There wasn't one. The best resource that I could find, and I want to suggest to you, if you're here today, there should not be a single copy of the Child Safeguarding Policy Guide left in that anteroom out there. Every single church, if you are in leadership, you need to read the Child Safeguarding Policy Guide that's published by Grace. It's the first thing that I did. I read it cover to cover. Just because you are a pastor or a leader in a church doesn't mean that you know how to identify predatory conduct. This will give you ways to identify it. It will show you what policies that are designed to protect children and adults look like. So how do we define the standard of care for an elder board in, one, creating an environment where abuse cannot thrive and responding to abuse when it occurs? I don't know how to download all that I've learned to you in 30 minutes, but I'm going to give it a try in what I'll call a scenario-based training. So if you have the ability to take notes, I want you to take notes fast, okay? I want you to spot the problems as we go along in this scenario, okay? You're the chair of an elder board. Someone on senior staff notifies you that a sexual harassment claim has been made against the church's senior pastor by a married woman in the pastor's home group. The woman is also employed on staff at that church in a supportive role. The woman notified the church's HR director, who sent an email to the pastor to let him know of the allegation. The pastor confronted the woman in the break room to try to clear up any misunderstandings. The woman and her husband have hired an attorney and have reached out to the local newspaper. The woman's lawyer has laid out in a demand letter a pattern of inappropriate sexual advances, some of which she accepted and some not, by the pastor going back at least 10 years, including a detailed timeline that matches up with the pastor's well-known and meticulously maintained Outlook calendar. The woman was also receiving ongoing counseling through the church at the same time, including sometimes from the pastor himself. This is not based on any given scenario, by the way. I want to make that disclaimer. It's not based on any given church or situation. Just want to use this to spur some discussion. Discussion has begun to trickle out on social media with some longtime members of the church rallying behind the pastor and questioning the victim based on her ongoing counseling and other information that's known about her. The church has 3,000 members, one of the larger churches in the city. Now the board is comprised of 10 people from various walks of life, including one lawyer. 3 of the board members were on the board 15 years ago when the senior pastor was selected. And they're close with the pastor and his wife relationally. They go on vacations together, and their kids are close friends. 2 of the board members came on in the last 30 days. Sunday comes every week, like it or not. The senior pastor's in the middle of a sermon series. His first draft of a book has gone to the editors at Zondervan. Easter is a month away. The church had to lay off 3 people at the beginning of the year due to changes in the church's giving patterns. The senior staff person looks at you and says, "What are we going to do?" You notify the entire elder board of the allegations and call an emergency board meeting. The lawyer on the board suggests inviting outside counsel to the board meeting. The pastor's 3 closest confidants on the board repudiate the woman's claims and recall that she was once counseled for alcoholism and that a staff member is walking her and her husband through a rocky marriage. The 2 new board members look like a couple of meerkats. Here are the topics discussed at the meeting. 1, what do we do with the pastor? 2, what do we do with the victim? 3, what do we do about the potential legal claim? Number 4, how do we communicate to the body? Number 5, how do we communicate to the staff? Number 6, how do we respond to mainstream media inquiries and social media posts? And number 7, what do we do if we can't unanimously agree on a path forward? It's a lot of things that you got to talk through. The church's executive pastor has the church's outside counsel call you. The church's lawyer, she says, don't talk to the victim. We'll contact our insurance carrier. We can conduct an internal investigation. We'll hire an outside public relations person to help us manage the claim. Keep the pastor in place while the investigation proceeds so that we don't lend credibility to the claims. I will reach out to the woman's lawyer behind the scenes and see if we can resolve this informally. It's a very reasonable type of outside counsel to expect. Somebody's going to protect the church. The church's executive pastor has the church's PR firm call you. The PR guy says, let's offer a blanket denial and a statement in support of our longtime pastor and his character and openness about this issue. Let's remind the body there's never been a claim like this made before, which will suggest that history tells us this isn't true. We'll state that we're in prayer for the woman making the claim, as well as her husband. So, everybody have a clear picture of the scenario? Here are some statements made by various elders at the board meeting. There were no witnesses. How do we handle this allegation against our pastor under 1 Timothy since there weren't 2 to 3 witnesses? Another statement, it's not like this is sexual abuse. She consented to anything that happened. Another statement, I talked to the senior pastor about these claims, and he said there's nothing to them. I've known him for 10 years, and I know when I look into his eyes that he's telling me the truth. Another statement, none of us is qualified or experienced enough to know what to do, so I think we should let the experts handle this. Let the lawyers do their job, let the PR people do their jobs. Another statement, if our pastor is being wrongly accused, his reputation will be destroyed just by this very allegation. This woman doesn't have the best home life. Do you think it's possible she just made this all up? Another statement, the fact that she hired a lawyer means she's not taking a biblical Matthew 18 approach to this problem. It's just a money grab, otherwise she would have come to us first. Another statement, we've been here for 4 hours. Does anyone want more coffee? Are we going to let her and her husband keep coming here? Her daughter serves in youth ministry. Should we ask her to take a break? We're in the middle of a capital campaign. This couldn't have come at a worse time. These are all things that you might hear in an elder board meeting involving an allegation like this in a church of this size. So what are the obvious warning signs here? You've probably already spotted some of them if you have a pastor's heart. Number one, certain elders may have a bias against belief, okay? A police detective who intakes a lot of these types of claims was asked, what advice would you give a church who is responding to claims like this? He said, start with belief. Not all elders will start with belief. Not all church staff will start with belief. Second obvious warning sign, the board has some issues with independence. Personal relationships are tugging on certain board members' ability to be objective. That's obvious. There's relational closeness there with a pastor. So it pushes on independence. When you're on a board or you're serving in leadership at a church, your obligation is not to any one employee of the organization. You have a fiduciary duty to the organization itself to respond. And you need to be independent in the way that you do that. Another obvious warning sign. Senior pastor confronted the woman personally and may attempt interference with any meaningful investigation that you conduct. Another warning sign. This board and perhaps this church are prone to image management. The PR team is issuing a denial before it even has the facts. Image management is a problem. The next warning sign. Outside counsel is providing advice that will likely protect the nonprofit entity known as the church, First Baptist Church of Whoville, PC, or actually a nonprofit corporation. That entity may end up getting protected and simultaneously risk re-victimizing the victim. Another problem, an internal investigation may lack competence here. None of you is probably Columbo, okay? You guys are called as pastors or church staff or church leaders. You're not investigators. You're not investigators, try as you may. You may not have the competence to conduct an adequate investigation. Another warning sign, there's a clear lack of understanding on the board of what activity constitutes abuse and why. The Webster's definition of abuse, verb, 1, use to bad effect or for a bad purpose, misuse. Second definition, treat, parentheses, a person or an animal with cruelty or violence, especially regularly or repeatedly. I think as churches, we tend to think of abuse as being something that is targeted regularly, repeatedly with cruelty or violence, as opposed to misuse of a human being in your body. Abuse has a much broader definition than sometimes or some churches would realize. Last but not least, the warning sign is no one in leadership has suggested listening to the victim yet. It's a warning sign. You're getting ready to blow this big time. How do you get it turned around? Well, I want to offer you some suggestions, okay? Write these down. The first one is you have to kill the 4 horsemen. Let me explain what I mean. So Rachel Denhollander, some of you know that name. It's a woman who was serially abused by Larry Nassar when she was part of the U.S. women's gymnastic team. She wrote, "To minimize or hide abuse out of concern for reputations, money, influence, or mere apathy, and a desire to not get involved is to utterly repudiate the witness of Christ." What is reputation? It's just pride. Biblically, that's pride, right? What's money? Biblically, it's greed, right? What's influence? Well, biblically, that's envy. We want our church to have as much influence as the next church down the street. Apathy, what is that? Well, biblically, we call that sloth, right? If the response or the leadership is motivated by any of those 4 things, it will end in tragedy for both the victim and the church. You have to, as an organization, highlight those things as potential problems. Here's the second suggestion I want to make to you. And I want to propose that this is your prime directive as leaders within the church. And if you are here as staff, just raise your hand if you're here as church staff. Do we have any elders in the room? Just raise your hand if you're an elder. Okay, I'm talking to you now. Just the elders. And staff, I want you to go back and talk to your elders about this. Here is the prime directive of an elder. It's 1 Timothy 5, verses 17 through 21. The elders, highlight this, who direct the affairs of the church well are worthy of double honor, especially those whose work is preaching and teaching. Your job as an elder is to direct the affairs of the church. The 1 Timothy 5 duty to direct the affairs of the church is non-delegable. Here's what I mean by that. That means that lawyers and PR people don't get to direct the affairs of the church. That is the elder's job. There are going to be times where, as churches, you are going to have to make decisions about whether to accept or reject the advice of your outside legal counsel and other professionals in order to do your job and direct the affairs of the church. As a lawyer, I'm involved in cases all the time where my clients hear my advice and go, "I'm not doing that." And I don't take it personally. But my job as a lawyer is to defend the organization and propose a course of action that's going to preclude liability, whether criminal or civil or otherwise. But there are times when we as leaders have to act with integrity and make choices based on things other than liability. Reproof is part of the job that elders do. Acting without favoritism is part of the assignment. And sometimes that puts you at odds with staff who are protecting their deep friendships. I want to propose to you, there are going to be times when you're responding to situations involving sexual abuse, and you will. There are 2 types of churches, those who've already responded to situations involving sexual abuse and those who will. There are going to be times when you tell staff to do something and they don't do it. Anybody in here ever told somebody on church staff to do something that they didn't do? It applies equally to abuse situations. It's your job to make sure that people are doing their job and responding to abuse the right way. Third suggestion, your job is to keep watch over the flock. The nonprofit corporation that is your church, First Baptist of Whoville, it's a nonprofit corporation. It's set up that way as a legal fiction so it doesn't have to pay taxes. That's why that organization exists, so that no individual person is liable for the conduct of that organization, and so it doesn't have to pay tax. It's just interesting that this passage, let's read it together, Acts 20:28. It says, "Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers." It doesn't say, "Keep watch over yourselves and the nonprofit corporation that your flock attends." It says, "Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he has bought with his own blood." A nonprofit corporation does not need a shepherd. The people do. The church is just people. Our job is to care for the people. That's it. So you have this distinction between the legal person of the church and the individual human beings who are being affected by the conduct of that church. You're not going to find anywhere in the Bible a directive on the part of the elders to protect a separate legal person, though I think elders often assume that that is their job. There are separate laws concerning the liability of churches. We may get into that with Dr. Bach, I'm not sure. Ecclesiastical privileges in Texas apply to the internal affairs of the organization. That means that nobody outside the church can tell the church how to run its business legally. Most churches of any size have insurance policies to insure that legal person and its officers and directors and agents and employees. That's separate and apart from doing our job, which is to care for the flock. So the last suggestive or last normative thing I want to tell you to do is I want you to ask, what is our mandate as a church? I agree with my friend Mary DeMuth. She just wrote a book called We Too. It came out in the last month or so. Highly recommend that you buy it, get it on Amazon, have your leadership team read it. She writes, "This is our Christian duty." Whenever a sentence begins like that, your ears should perk up. This is our Christian duty, the church's mandate, to protect the innocent and become a haven for those who are harmed. I agree with her. I think many of you, when you encounter situations at your church or your organization involving sexual abuse, you're going to have fears. Okay, let me list out for you what they're going to be. Okay? The first one is, if people find out about this, they will lose confidence in the institution of the church and possibly question their faith. It's a natural fear. Actually, when Vonda was going through her situation, and I was talking through it with my wife, one of the things that she raised said, I wonder if this is going to cause people to question their faith. Yeah, it might. It's a natural fear because it will happen. But that doesn't mean that you don't do the right thing because of that fear. The second fear is, if people find out about this, they will stop giving. They might. The third fear is, if people find out about this, the person being accused is going to have his reputation sullied. He might. And maybe he earned it. I don't know. Maybe she earned it. I don't know. We aren't equipped to investigate this and find out the truth of what happened. You're probably right about that. And you're going to probably need to seek help. The next fear, if we compensate the victim, our church won't have enough money to fund its future programs and future plans. Maybe that's true. Number 6, the next fear, I'm going to lose relationships. You might. It has happened. It's happened to Vonda and Scott. It's happened to me. I want to propose to you that these issues are what we will call the outside of the cup. In Matthew 23, verses 25 through 26, it says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law," I guess that's me today, "and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they're full of greed and self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean." The question is, do we want to be outside of the cup leaders or inside of the cup leaders? I think it's a fair question that we've got to ask ourselves. Which are we going to be? You know, before I got involved in helping the Dyers and getting involved in other situations involving sexual abuse, there were times where I went, what am I doing here? And then I traveled up to South Barrington to meet with Willow Creek's board, and I was in the hotel room before I'm going to go and meet with their entire board, and they've got like a zillion people on their board, and their whole executive staff. I'm putting on my cufflinks in the hotel room going, what am I doing here? And then I got up this morning, I put on my cufflinks, I went, what am I doing here? God put me in this situation involuntarily, and my hope is that some of the learnings that I gleaned, I'll be able to share with you today, and that you'll be able to learn something from this. I just want to close with one last word. It's Acts 13:1, something that occurred to me. It says, "Now in the church at Antioch there were prophets and teachers, Barnabas, Simeon called Niger, Lucius of Cyrene, Manaen, who had been brought up with Herod the Tetrarch, and Saul." Prophets and teachers are designed in the early church to coexist, and they're designed in the church to coexist today. I think in Scripture, when you see the prophetic voices and the teachers at odds with one another, it's usually in the presence of great sin. David and Nathan, Samuel and Saul, Elijah and Ahab, the list goes on and on. We have prophetic voices in our evangelical church today, and they're at odds with some of our leaders, and we need to ask why. Are we inviting prophetic voices to speak into this issue with us? Are we inviting the teachers to hear what they have to say? I'm going to stick around for a while and answer any questions you might have, and I think Dr. Bach's going to join me up here. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this morning.